Okay, if you would turn to page 355. Again, you should have 3 pages of notes, and one of them is just back. So the intention today is to finish early so I can give you some of your stuff back, and especially to catch up with some of you in terms of some stuff that you need to correct or whatever else too. So this module is all about the lymphatic system, and it's not that long, and understandably so, although the lymphatic system is vital to you and to me, and I think it's very interesting. So it's one of the modules that I enjoy. It's a discussion that you will see will include immunity, and that's near and dear to my heart. I know I've shared with you my sweet wife is immune deficient and has up until this year, until the insurance company has been really pains in the rear ends. But she receives gamma globulin infusions to boost her immune factors. Right now she is very low in 2 of the 4. But in any respect, very interesting discussion. The lymphatic system, if you would, on page 355, there's an interesting diagram of the lymph system. Not necessarily, although it surely would be one you might find interesting to draw, though you won't necessarily need to. So the bulleted points on your terms, in terms of introducing this system, it is a vast network of lymph vessels, and that's why I wanted to refer you to page 355 to get just a sense for what that means. Similar, though not as vast, obviously, as the circulatory system, which run throughout the entire body and form the infrastructure of the lymphatic system. So lymph tissue is groups of lymphocytes and other cells which support the lymphocytes. Lymph nodes are encapsulated masses of lymph tissue found along with lymph vesicles. So lymph nodes, you have them all over your body. You've noticed sometimes that they swell. You might notice the swelling before you feel the effects of whatever infection might be going on. I have one particular daughter whose lymph glands swell like grapes or mini tomatoes when she gets sick. I mean, they just blow up like balloons. It's just amazing. And so sometimes you can see the lymph glands swollen before she feels the effects of whatever virus or whatever is going on. Lymph itself is a watery liquid formed from interstitial fluid. That's the fluid between the cells, 10% of which is collected in lymph vessels and found in lymph vessels, produced by leakage out of capillaries, eventually diffusing back into capillaries via the right lymphatic duct or thoracic duct, which dumps the lymph into the subclavian veins and then is carried by the circulatory system. So the fascinating thing about the lymphatic system is its sort of work together with the circulatory system in the sense that it's in and out of the circulatory system. Lymph capillaries begin as dead-end capillaries formed by epithelial cells which overlap one another, forming valves. If you would, turn over to the next page. Forming valves which prevent the lymph from flowing backwards, and they're found in all body tissue with the exception of the central nervous system, the bone marrow, and tissues without blood vessels, such as the cartilage. So the way it works is it goes from lymph capillaries to lymph vessels to lymph nodes. Those are the filtering stations. That's why they get big. They swell with pathogens viruses, bacteria. To the right and left subclavian veins, and to the circulatory system, where they simply become, again, part of the blood plasma. So the reason I wanted you to look at page 356 is the little depictions on the bottom down there, particularly the one-way valves, which allow the lymph to flow in one direction, but then not back in the other. So we have, if you haven't already extrapolated in terms of the discussion here, there is no lymph heart, which beats and moves the lymph. Of course, that is, as we will see, is done by virtue of the movement of your muscles. But the point is they are unidirectional in terms of a lymph capillary. So the functions of the lymphatic system, the discussion there begins on the bottom of page 357. And if you turn over to page 358, we'll refer to the little drawing there too. And we see it's titled The Liquid Exchange Between Capillaries, Tissues, and Lymph. So kind of an interesting little drawing there to the degree that it makes sense. All right, so back to your notes. The first bulleted point under the functions is that there are three of them, three functions. Fluid balance, again, homeostasis. We talked about that very first module in the vital nature of that. Fat absorption, and then, of course, the one that interests me most, and that's the immunological defense. So without the lymphatic system, there would be no fluid balance. There just would not be, resulting in edema, which is a buildup of interstitial fluid, which can lead to swelling. That's what we're talking about when we have swelling in our feet or legs. Some of you have older relatives, perhaps, and I pray you don't have younger relatives this way, but they swell pretty badly in their feet, maybe in their hands, but in their feet. Sadly, some women experience this as well during pregnancy. Swelling can take place actually for a number of different reasons. I've got a lot of daughters, so I have illustrations for just about everything. But my oldest daughter was pregnant again last year. Well, actually 2 years ago. Her son's going to turn 2. But she does not necessarily have gestational diabetes. At least that was not found. But I just got to believe that's what the problem was. But that little girl, and she is little. She's 5'1". I mean, she swells up. She looked like, her legs look like elephant legs. I mean, this little tiny kid, well, grown woman, but my kid, it was just so sad in terms of that swelling. And again, that's what we're talking about is the edema, the leaching out of this fluid. And if it wasn't for the lymphatic system, that would be the norm. So this is how it works. As blood flows under the pressure through a capillary, the fluid, which then, as you will recall, is called interstitial fluid, is pushed out through the pores. The blood cells and proteins don't get out of those pores, as you will remember, bathing the cells with oxygen and nutrients, and then picking up carbon dioxide and wastes, which is then drawn back into the capillary through the process of osmosis. 10% of this fluid is not drawn directly into the capillaries, but instead goes into the lymphatic system. So again, if you can envision in your mind, in your mind's eye, and you don't even have to do that. Don't even have to bother, because we've provided a picture. So the picture there, 12.3, shows in terms of that 100% of fluid that gets pushed out to do what we just discussed in terms of the delivery of nutrients and oxygen. So 90% of it goes back into the capillary there, but 10% of it goes into the lymph capillary. And elephantiasis, so anybody ever seen pictures of that, elephantiasis? It's a disease that's, I believe, caused by, it's a tropical parasite that occupy the lymph vessels. And as a result, they block the flow of lymph, and they cause a backup of lymph and much swelling. And so when I mentioned my daughter's legs looking like elephant legs in the sense, you know, again, relative and compared, but just terribly, terribly swollen. In terms of this disease, in terms of this parasitic infection, these people, they swell up, and they really do, in terms of the size of the extremities, that it usually takes place in an extremity. It is incredible how sad that is. So if you Google it, I mean, that was in a lot of, I mean, I know I saw it repeatedly in biology textbooks and that sort of thing, but it's called elephantiasis. So fluid balance is vital, and that's one of the functions of the lymphatic system. Fat absorption. Clearly, my lymphatic system isn't working as effectively as it should. But anyway, from the digestive system, the lacteals are specialized lymph vessels in the lining of the small intestine to collect the fats which are absorbed by the small intestine during digestion. This fat liquid takes on a milky white color and is called chyle, and eventually that's dumped into the subclavian veins and the circulatory system. So that's another function of the lymphatic system, and that is fat absorption. And then finally, the immunological defense, the process by which the body protects itself from pathogenic invaders. We're talking about bacteria, fungi, parasites, and foreign substances. So all of those things. And so let's continue our discussion, and we'll look at in greater detail at some of these things. Turn over to page 360, and that begins where we're going now, the lymph tissue, the lymph nodules, and the lymph nodes. So in terms of these various tissues, the diffuse lymphatic tissue is concentrations of lymphatic tissue with no clear boundaries. It bends with the surrounding tissue. It's in mucous membranes, it's around the lymph nodules, it's in the spleen. It kind of looks like a mass of purple dots. So, and I don't believe there is a, well, yeah, there we go. Turn over to page 362. There was. Page 362 is another one of our fabulous drawings. That's good. And you see the little purple dots, the diffuse lymphatic tissue. So, in terms of it, that is one. Turn over to page 2 of your notes. The lymph nodules are lymphatic tissue arranged into compact, somewhat spherical structures. They look like a lot of purple dots surrounded by a dark, dense ring of purple dots. They're bumps inside the lower lips, all right? You know, for those of you who chew, that's where the dip goes, right? Disgusting, isn't it? Played a lot of baseball in my life, and I could never understand the guys that chewed. That was a cool thing when I was a kid. You know, high school baseball, you had your chew. Sorry about that. But anyway, so they can be found as a single structure, or can be grouped together in small clumps. Classic example of that are your tonsils, all right, in terms of lymph nodules. The tonsils form a protective ring around the throat. Tonsillitis is an inflammation of those tonsils. Anybody here had yours removed? So there's one. Isn't that interesting? So Hava, you're the only one. Everybody else got their tonsils. Is that right? What about that? Man, when I was little, that was a rite of passage. Just about everybody had their tonsils out. I don't know if it was doctors making easy money or what the deal was, but the other side of the coin was there was antibiotics, but not nearly to the degree and the effectiveness of modern antibiotics. Problem with tonsils becoming repeatedly infected is blood supply to the area is minimal, and so it's hard sometimes to get medication to those little things. So they're infected and they sort of remain infected, and ultimately some folks have to have them removed. But that's very interesting because they have definitely moved away from that as time has moved on. I think I had, of my 5 children, I think only 2 have had their tonsils removed. But and I still have mine. I was one of the unique ones. Almost had them out, but I was one of the unique ones in my day. So, lymph nodes, the last aspect here, are encapsulated, dense, connective tissue, masses of lymphatic tissue with lymph nodules, so it's a group of nodules that contain germinal centers where rapid mitosis of lymphocytes take place in response to foreign invaders in the lymph. Lymphocytes are released into the lymph, to the bloodstream, to the infected tissue. Along their outer edge, lymph nodes are fed by several afferent lymph vesicles, but exit through just one efferent lymph vesicle, thus acting as a transfer station. And these lymph nodes have basic 3 basic functions in terms of that overall depiction of the lymph node. That's what you're looking at there on page 362. So they are a testing station. So 10% of the interstitial fluid that flows through these things is a sample, so to speak, of the fluid in the blood, and foreign invaders are detected. And if they are, the lymph node produces lymphocytes and sends them into the bloodstream to obviously respond to that invader. The idea is, you know, if you find infection, you send out little soldiers to go attack whatever it is that is invading. And then they also filter the lymph. The returning clean lymph back to the blood. So they act as a filter, and again, that is a way that in some instances they can become infected themselves and have to be treated. Some of you are familiar with the lymphatic cancers, and again, in terms of what we're talking about with respect to cancer, is cells rapidly reproducing in an abnormal way, and then if they metastasize, they break loose from where that specific tumor is and travel to other parts of the body. And one aspect of that can be in terms of the lymph nodes themselves. They sadly can become cancerous and have to be removed. That same daughter I mentioned to you that had such a difficult pregnancy the last time also is my only child that has had cancer. She had a small spot of the dangerous skin cancer. It just went right out of my head.
Melanoma?
Well, say what?
Melanoma?
Thank you very much. Melanoma. And fortunately, it was localized. They caught it at stage 1, but they took a couple of lymph nodes near that site as well. So interesting aspects of that. So in terms of the structures here, we've just discussed them and the aspects of the lymph nodes. Now let's talk about larger versions of these things, and that is the spleen and the thymus gland. And we are not blessed with nice little drawings of that, but that's okay. So the spleen, I'm reading from your notes, is the size of a clenched fist. And it is in an encased capsule with a skeleton of trabeculae and smooth muscle tissue. And it has 2 types of tissue, red and white pulp. The red pulp is made up of twisted veins and reticular fibers, and these things are full of blood cells which were in the capillaries of the spleen. And then okay, I thought I saw a hand. Then the white pulp is composed of diffuse lymphatic tissue and lymph nodules, sort of similar to a lymph node, and surrounds the arteries that enter the spleen. And the spleen has three basic functions. In a similar way to lymph nodes, it filters the blood. As the blood passes through the white pulp, foreign invaders stimulate a response from the diffuse lymphatic tissue or the lymph nodules. So the spleen also cleans out dead erythrocytes. You will recall the rapid production and death of red blood cells from the last module. This short lifespan, when they die, they're removed by macrophages which engage in phagocytosis in the red pulp. We were going to try to post that. That would probably be neat to try to do next week in terms of chasing that invader and then engaging in phagocytosis. Interesting video my son came across this past week, which I'm going to try to figure out how to put it up there and show you. We can't do a lot of this stuff, but maybe once in a while we can. So maybe even put it on the computer. Maybe I could figure out a way to do that. Maybe you will figure out a way to do that. And of course, the spleen is a reservoir for oxygen-rich blood. It's a backup supply of blood containing oxygen and nutrients in case of blood loss. The spleen is, you're aware, and maybe you've thought about this, how is it possible that seals are able to dive and swim underwater for such a long period of time? I mean, these mammals act like fish in one sense, in their ability to stay underwater for the length of time that they're able to remain. Well, that's because they have massive spleens which allow them to access this readily available, rich oxygen-containing blood. And some of you, well, let me finish and then I'll comment. If the spleen has to be removed, tissues in the liver as well as other lymphatic tissues in the body take over the first two tasks, though not as effectively, allowing for greater susceptibility to infection and more sensitivity to bleeding, to hemorrhage. Any of you know anyone who was in an accident? Most of the time it's an automobile accident where their abdomen is jarred and their spleen is ruptured, and so emergency surgery has to take place. Anybody know that? No, anybody? Okay. Well, again, the reason for the need of emergency surgery, of course, is the bleeding out, and we've just discovered why. It's because that small fist-sized, basically lymph gland contains so much blood, and there's so much access to it in terms of blood. Well, the other is the thymus gland. In terms of these additional tissues in the lymphatic system, the thymus gland is anterior to the heart and posterior to the upper sternum, so it's between your heart and your sternum, and it changes with maturity. It's large and growing during childhood. It decreases in size and becomes more fibrous and fatty after puberty. It seems, and no one knows this exactly for certain, it seems to promote the maturation of T lymphocytes and produces chymosin, and that's a hormone that affects the immunological response in the body. So it's not known exactly what this thing does, but there's a good sense for that. Well, let's begin our discussion of immunity. We'll go to the middle of page 3, so we'll kind of be right in the middle, and then I can finish up with stuff that, as I mentioned, I wanted to do. So immunity, of course, is one function of the lymphatic system. This discussion begins on page 365, and is one that, I've got your notes, but one that you might want to read through just as an aside. It is one function of the lymphatic system. It protects against pathogenic bacteria, sinus infections, infected cuts. It protects against pathogenic fungi, yeast that cause athlete's foot, thrush. Babies get that a lot in terms of just development. That's a fungal infection in the mouth. Parasites, pinworm, tapeworm, these sorts of things, and of course viruses, which are chunks of RNA or DNA wrapped in their own protein coat without cellular machinery. What they do is use the host cell's machinery to reproduce itself. And then also, and we don't think a lot in terms of our own immunological response against cancers, but we do. We have a response for damaged cells that perform uncontrolled mitosis. I've known a couple of people, in fact, one who is surviving with cancer. She's had uterine cancer, of course, had her uterus removed many years ago, but I think it's going on 8 or 9 years, and she's still struggling. She's still cancer positive, but it is possible anyway that part of her success in this, another woman I knew had stage 4 brain cancer, and she did it the same way. They adopted a diet that was all natural and very limited in terms of what they eat. They eliminated all food products that had any kind of chemical to it, and as I say, subsisted on mostly vegetable type things, very little meat, and the purpose of that was to boost the immune system, and that's what it does. That's the only issue with my cool, refreshing beverage and other processed foods is they contain chemicals, some of which depress our immune system. And the point of what I'm telling you is that by virtue of their diet, they supercharged their immune system and have been able to successfully deal with cancer, at least to some degree. They've also done chemo, but it's helped. So it's always a thought. It's always in the back of my mind, though I still enjoy the cool, refreshing beverage too much. And finally, toxins. Those are chemicals that are harmful or foreign to the body. Turn over to page 3. There are 2 divisions in the immune system: the innate or non-specific immunity, and then the acquired immunity. That's and the innate non-specific immunity. So these are, in terms of this, an immune response that is the same regardless of the pathogen or toxin encountered. That's the innate non-specific immunity. And then the acquired specific immunity is an immune response that targets at a specific pathogen or toxin. So the way to conceive of these things is one is a sort of general defense, and then another is specifically designed to target a specific enemy. Let's look, I think we can finish this week by looking at the innate non-specific immunity, and that is sort of your first line of defense. So keratin in the skin cells, yeah, believe it or not, it makes the skin waterproof. It allows the skin to act as a barrier and therefore keeps foreign invaders out of the body. We said it when we discussed the skin in terms of the importance of keeping care of your skin. You know, I was raised in Florida, and was, in the sun all the time, always had a tan, and I'm very light complected, so that was an effort. But part of that I'm paying a price for now in terms of, fortunately, non-metastatic, but various kinds of skin cancers as a result of being out in the too much sun over the years. But again, the keratin in the skin is one layer of defense. So is sweat. It washes the skin, it lowers the pH, and that inhibits the growth or activity of pathogens. The sebaceous glands, which secrete oil, well, they also can carry antibacterial substances. So, I produce enough oil on my skin, I think, to power the city of Madison if they were able to harvest it. But in any respect, as much as it's aggravated me over the years, it produces a very positive thing too in terms of it being antibacterial. Mucus, the epithelial tissue such as that in the sinuses and trachea, secrete mucus that traps microorganisms, moving it to the mouth or nose where it's coughed or blown out or swallowed. And when you swallow that stuff, that won't get gross on you, but when you swallow that stuff, well, it goes to the stomach and encounters the gastric juices, as we discussed there. It's got a pH of 1 to 2, and that's enough to dispatch most pathogens. The tears in your eyes contain lysosome. That's an enzyme that breaks down the cell walls of many, and I might add most, bacteria. Pink eye is a bacterial infection of the eye that's caused by a bacteria that is resistant, is not killed by lysosome. The urine actually washes the urinary opening of the body. Women with large bladders are more susceptible to UTIs because they urinate less frequently. Again, because of the anatomy in terms of men and women. Women in particular who urinate less are more susceptible to UTIs. And I might add that's especially the case in older folks. More women, but also in men in terms of their susceptibility to urinary infections, though and a lot of us men, as we get older, we go more. So that's just the way it works. And finally, two more. The cervical mucus, which contains antibodies as well. And then, oddly enough, symbiotic organisms. So any of you here like the activated yogurts? Anybody here like yogurt? Eat that regularly? Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it? Yeah. And it boosts your immune system by virtue of stocking, so to speak, your gut with good bacteria that are able to eliminate and or choke out pathogenic bacteria. I have a friend, now, of course, because I'm going to illustrate him, I can't think of the term. Come on, come back to me. Well, if I can't use him as an example, it's the exact same feature. But my son's dog, it's a 4-year-old miniature schnauzer, and we had her hardly any time at all. We got her at about eight weeks. My son got her at 8 weeks. And notice this dog was pooping probably 18 to 20 times a day, and most of the time in the house, all right? We just couldn't get this dog to stop. And so we tried a lot of different things between us and the vet, and finally agreed to some expensive blood testing and other issues or other activities that were done around the time she was spayed. And come to discover she has a malady known as dysbiosis. And that simply means the tendency for her gut, and a lot of times it is stimulated or brought on by consuming higher fat-based foods. So she's on a digestive type specialty food that is very, very low fat. But anyway, the idea that the bacteria in your gut gets, in terms of the concentrations, get off, and as a result makes for one to be very, very sick. And this term that I can't think of with regards to my friend, similar reality, specific term, and a specific bacteria, which for the life of me now, it's gone out of my head. But anyway, and this poor man, he retired 3 years ago, and within a month, somehow he had contracted this bacteria, and life for him has been pretty much horrible ever since. I mean, in terms of trying to get that right, and then other issues that it has caused. So the point of it all is a good diet, you know, supplements from time to time with yogurt, you know, and to notice that, you know, if you have issues or diseases of the bowel, to remind yourself of the importance of stocking it with good stuff. So comments about that. We're going to quit right there, and we'll begin the innate non-specific immunity next time. But is there anything about this stuff?